Welcome to Talkin Hoops. I'm Jason Andera of Midco Sports. This is Michael McCleary of the Argus Leader, and we are ready to talk more hoops today. We've got an interesting topic we're going to set up. The top teams in the state, regardless of class, girls and boys. I'm excited. We're not going to talk about that yet, but I'm excited about kind of breaking this down, aren't you?
Yeah, I mean, this has been sort of a conversation that's been bubbling up a little bit over the past couple of weeks, especially since the Hanson Boys Basketball Classic, when people saw Dakota Valley and the performance that they put on. So, you know, maybe that's a little bit of a hint of what's to come, but it's, it's kind of fun to go down the list and see how these kind of teams that we don't actually know are better than the other kind of stack up against based on sort of arbitrary results that we're throwing around. So
it's we're just like you guys out there. You guys are probably all talking at home. What would Dakota Valley do if they played Lincoln? What would Sioux Valley do if they had to play, whoever, Jefferson or whatever? And we're gonna take that and actually dissect it a little bit, give you a little framework to have your discussions by the water cooler if you need to. But let's start this week out by talking about some of the top performers over the last 7 days. And I got a couple I want to point out here. One, how about Avery Broughton? She came back from her 2 knee injuries. Kind of a slow start into the season, but now she's starting to ramp it up. 26-point game against Kimball Whitelake, 15.8 rebound game earlier last week. She is really starting to come into her own.
Yeah, and when she got that injury, it was obviously late in it was midway through the summer, so it was even a worse sort of timing than the last injury, which obviously she's dealt with quite a bit over the last couple of years, which should have a toll on you both mentally and physically to begin with, tearing both your ACLs. So, anytime she comes back and does stuff like this, it's remarkable, and she's a really good player, and we know that. So, it's good to see her back and playing well.
A lot of great rebounding games for her, too. Corsica Stickney still has some work to do to get, into the playoff picture, get into the rankings, and get into a serious playoff mode, but she has really started to amp her game up. Wanted to mention her. Isaac Bruns, how about him? 46 points, a school record against Elk Point Jefferson, and then he goes and plays against Western Christian, beats the number 1 team in Class 2A in Iowa, and then finishes up with a Tuesday performance with 27 points, getting his 2,000th career point on the way. He has just been a star. Nick Gaspar, I got to mention him, out of Del Rapids St. Mary's, a 23-point game, a 41-point game, a double-double. He's been on fire. Reese Ross out of St. Thomas More played against Red Cloud. They were undefeated coming into the game, and she went for 33. And we talk a little bit about Reese Ross. There's not many players like her doing the things that she can do, all offensively and defensively in the state.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure if you ask her, she'll still say that her best skill is defense. And, she's obviously incredibly long, really, really good instincts in that game. But just her offensive game and the way she rebounds sort of at the position that she plays. I mean, she could play, forward, but she's obviously playing a lot on the perimeter, shooting a lot, and, sort of running the offense through her on that team. But, it's really impressive just the incredible amount of ways that she impacts the game, not just in scoring or rebounding. It's everything.
Yeah, on her summer team in North Tartan, she was asked to play the 5, and she didn't feel super comfortable with it, but she did great, and she's going to Utah next year because of how great athletically she is. I also want to mention a couple of triple-doubles, a rare line by Reed Russ, 28 points, 20 rebounds, so that's a 2020 game. And then he threw in 10 assists and 7 steals on top of it against the Del Rapids team. And then Rugby Riken, another RR, 16 points, a school record 16 assists in a game, and 11 rebounds versus Huron. Triple-doubles at the high school level, when we're playing 32-minute games, are legit.
Yeah, to plug some of my other beats, we already talked about 2 USD commitments. We got Reed Russ for football and Isaac Bruns for basketball, which, going back to Isaac Bruns. And Avery Broughton, too, USD women's basketball as well, so 3. Going back to Isaac, though, it's kind of incredible. Obviously, he scored his 2,000 point the other night. It's kind of incredible, the scoring numbers and sort of what he's doing at Dakota Valley after his brother did basically the exact same things just right before him. So it's it's pretty crazy what the Bruns Brun's family has done at that school, and it doesn't seem like it's going to stop after this year too.
We got a sophomore on the team too.
Yeah. So the triple doubles, especially Reed's 2020 10. I mean, almost a quadruple double with the 7 steals. I mean, that's numbers that you really don't see, and it's against a really good team in Del Rapids too.
Yeah, amazing performance by him and both Rugby Riken with that 16 assist game against Huron. And then one more I want to throw out, Damon Wilkinson. This is a basically 6'9", 6'10" guy who's still unsigned and is putting up monster numbers. I think colleges have to take notice. A 37.17 rebound game against Elkton Lake Benton. He played against a class higher in T, went for 25 and 9, and another 17-15 game on Tuesday night. He has been, every time I watch him, I'm like, I don't get what schools maybe aren't seeing. This guy looks legit.
Yeah, and I got to talk to him after the Hanson boys basketball classic game. Obviously another good performance for him, and he acknowledged that it is a stressful time. It's he didn't want to give much more than I'm uncommitted. That's obviously signing day for football, which he holds a couple football offers, came and went, and obviously the signing period's not over, but he's definitely, I'm sure, kind of seeing what's out there, seeing what coaches are going to come by. If you stroll into the gym pretty much any time that he plays, I don't know what you don't see. He's got the size, he's got the skill, super aggressive player, and he seems like he has room to fill out as well. So I think he's got a lot of potential as a basketball player. So it's obviously great to see him, putting up numbers like this in each and every game.
Yeah, there's just a few of the top performers amongst several who went for big weeks. Keep those coming in, so make sure that we notice who's doing work out there, because we see a lot of box scores. Some people think that we have access to all the box scores. We do not. We do our best to dig that up for you and try to put it all in one place. But yeah, let us know if we're missing anybody on that list. Let's move on to our conversation of the day. We're going to talk top 10, regardless of class. Let's start in boys basketball, and I'll just give you my number one, and then you give me your number one, and we'll kind of go back and forth. How's that sound?
Sure.
All right, we'll start with my number one, and I've got the Jefferson Cavaliers up here, and it's simply because the quality of their schedule that they've played and staying undefeated is kind of mind-blowing for me. Yes, they've had several close games, but wins over Lincoln, Brandon Valley, Roosevelt, Mitchell, Sioux Falls Christian, even though they were close. But lately they've had 3 single-digit wins, and I feel like the gap is narrowing just a hair, but no losses against the AA competition. For me, that puts them at number one. They've got a test coming up, by the way, next week against Lincoln on the 17th. That will, I think, really test that undefeated streak. But who do you have at number one?
Yeah, I went in a different route here. I went with Dakota Valley.
I think a lot of people would agree with you on that, but give me the case.
You know what? This is really close, because we've discussed this with Jefferson as well, who is right next to them as my number two, just to preview that. Jefferson's sort of close games is not really that's not really like the full picture of what it is with the Cavaliers, because sometimes they have these slower starts and then they dominate teams in the second half. Mm-hmm. And we go back a couple weeks to Brandon Valley, that's what happened, and that's pretty much what's happened in a lot of these close wins.
Against Roosevelt, they did that earlier in the year.
They'll have one difficult quarter, or maybe not have the fastest start, but they play stretches where teams cannot stop them at all. So Jefferson absolutely deserves that number one ranking, in Class AA or in pretty much everything, if we want to do this regardless of class ranking. But right now, I looked at that Sioux Falls Christian win for both Dakota Valley and Jefferson, and recency bias. Sioux Falls Christian, Dakota Valley beat them a little bit more handily than Jefferson did. It was another one of those really, really close games, and I think Sioux Falls Christian's a really good team, but recency bias, I just feel like Dakota Valley's playing at such a high level that, if they went against each other in a 7-game series right now, maybe Dakota Valley would squeeze it out. But
it's a good argument. The common opponent, they both played Sioux Falls Christian, like you said. Obviously, Dakota Valley had an easier time, but they were at home at that time, and Jefferson had to go on the road. I just think Dakota Valley's had these close games. They had the close game Tuesday against Vermilion. They had a close game against West Central earlier in the year, against Lamar's earlier in the year. I just feel like if they were playing Double-A competition night in, night out, I don't think they would be undefeated.
Yeah, and I think that's a great argument because we know how difficult Double-A is, and how competitive it's been this year. And Jefferson, just going back to what they did in football. I mean, they got some of the best athletes, that the state maybe has ever seen. Collection of players in that same senior class and junior class. So it's really hard to argue against them, and they're basically 1A and 1B for me. But for the sake of this fun ranking, let's do something different.
We'll each be on one side. You guys let us know which side you would be on in that. Let's talk about the number 3 team. I've got Lincoln. I believe you do as well.
Yes.
So we agree Lincoln belongs at number 3, but I think a win over Jefferson next week would really change our minds about that. But they've got a couple games in between now and then. They had a close game with Mitchell. But talking about signature wins for Lincoln, I mean, they beat Mitchell by 1. They beat Minneapolis North, a much smaller school. Took them by less than 10, a single-digit win. They still need a signature win, though, to get up into that elite conversation, I think.
Yeah, and Jefferson is definitely, that team for them, I think, right now in the schedule because, as far as Class AA goes, I mean, it's been Jefferson and Lincoln pretty much all season long. But, going back to Jefferson, and a reason why you'd probably put them at number 1 is, Jefferson's sort of matchup proof. Where Lincoln clearly has the matchup advantage with JT Rock at the center spot, but
after that they're not huge.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, Jefferson has sort of that 1 through 5 where it's just like solid. It's solid in everything.
6 guys coming off the bench as well.
Exactly. So they're matchup proof. They could do anything against any opponent. So some of the maybe things that I'm thinking about Dakota Valley and how they sort of dominate their matchups throughout the lineup. I mean, maybe that is sort of vanquished when you play Jefferson. But, Lincoln has proven to this point that they're the number 2 in Class AA, and I think we both agree that Class AA is really, really competitive at the top. So that's what gives them the edge for me.
Yeah, I agree. I think just the toughness of AA, individual talent, maybe not as much as some of the other classes, but just that night in, night out high qualities of team that you play matters, and we both have Lincoln there. I have Sioux Falls Christian at number 4. Who is your number 4? I think you have Mitchell there.
Yeah, I put Mitchell pretty high actually. It's Mitchell's been getting quite a few. Obviously they played close with Lincoln and Jefferson. Those are the top 2 teams, and that win over Yankton, that was an impressive win. I don't know. I think the weapons for Mitchell are really coming together at this point of the season. And they got a lot of people who could fill it up. So, with Steele Morgan, with their size and shooting, just so many things are coming together. I think, we talk about that 1 through 5 of that really solid starting lineup. I just think Mitchell really has it, and they're putting things together. So, I think there might be a little bit of AA bias here where, you see them competing against these teams that we're discussing at the top of the list. But, at the same time, I think that if you put them against some of these teams that I have right below them, it's going to be close, but I just think Mitchell will be able to pull it out.
Yeah, I agree. Dylan Solik's having a fantastic year for Mitchell. They don't get a lot of headliners going for 20, 25, 30 points a game like they did with Caden Hinker last year, but a solid 1 through 5, like you said. I have Sioux Falls Christian at 4. A little high, some people think, because they're only ranked 3rd in Class A, and I have them 4 overall here. But I've been high on Sioux Falls Christian all year. I think they are a lot more consistent than I thought they would be. Starting 3 sophomores in the lineup, I thought they would be a little more inconsistent. They have been consistently tough all year, and they started it off with a win over a ranked Lennox team to start the year with a 93-point performance. And then they keep winning close games even when they're not playing well. The Del Rapids game, they won close. Hamlin, they won close. White River, they played well and handled them this weekend. I really like that. And their 2 losses, Dakota Valley had to go on the road to Dakota Valley and then played the number 1 team in AA, and were leading at halftime in that game against Jefferson. That for me is what sold me on them being the number 4 team. So I've got 4 Sioux Falls Christian, 5 Mitchell your 5. So who's your 5 on your list?
Yeah, I've been pretty much all season ranking Sioux Valley ahead of Sioux Falls Christian in my Class A rankings. We talked about them way back at the Hanson Boys Basketball Classic, where I thought they'd come out strong against Dakota Valley, and they did. For a couple minutes there, but Dakota Valley just ended up taking over as the game went on. But I just think Sioux Valley just really has that top end talent that I really think is going to push them ahead in games like that. If we're discussing them versus Sioux Falls Christian, but I'm eager to see that matchup if we ever get it. So it's that's right now I would say that's pretty close for me. But just going off of the rankings that I've been sending in pretty much all year, I'm just sticking with Sioux Valley.
I think that's fair. I've got Sioux Valley as my number 6 team on my list. Your number 6, Sioux Falls Christian, 2 teams we just talked about. So a little bit of difference there. We both agreed that the number 7 team, Brandon Valley, another solid AA team. Their problem has been, they've laid a couple of eggs against teams that they should have probably beaten. And their most recent example was Tuesday night against Washington, where they only scored 14 points in the first half and just really didn't play well against Washington. But I think they've got the potential. They've shown it. They played right with Jefferson. They played, they beat Pierre. They've had some really good games this year against Yankton. And one of their losses was to Houston, Tennessee, which is a really solid team as well. So I think Brandon's got potential, and that's why I have them at 7.
Yeah, I have them at 7 too. I was really impressed with them against Jefferson. I thought they came out with a lot of energy, and they have a lot of really solid players there. Their losses, we mentioned the Jefferson game, but also that Aberdeen Central loss. And obviously it wasn't the best loss, based on records, but Aberdeen Central.
Yeah. They went through a hot streak there. Yeah.
And with Spencer Barr, they have a guy who could fill it up maybe better than anybody in the state at that position. So it's not shocking that based on records, a team like that could get hot on a single night. So I think you would excuse a loss like that for Brandon Valley too. So then you look at their wins, and at one point we were thinking Pierre was one of the top 3 teams in Class AA, and I think Brandon Valley, with some of the wins that they've got, and they've sort of taken Pierre out of that sort of top end conversation where now Brandon Valley is being the team that's tossed around there. So I'm impressed with Brandon Valley, and I was really pleased to see how they played against Jefferson, and obviously they didn't finish that one out, but we talked. Jefferson's a really good team, and they know how to finish games.
And we'll see if Brandon Valley maybe kind of earns that spot by how they play on Friday night against Lincoln. That will be a really, really good test for them. Number 8 on both of our lists, the Winter Warriors. For Winter, really one signature win was at the Hanson Classic, where they upset St. Thomas More and really haven't lost a game to anybody other than Pierre, who's a class higher, but they haven't had as many tests as some of these other teams on the list. But still, we see the potential there. Blake Vollmer has been exploding lately, scoring. They got an all-around good defensive team. I like Winter.
Yeah, and I think we saw just how good of a defender Blake Vollmer is at the Hanson Boys Basketball Classic too. So, that's something that really sets them apart. But, some of the shots that Aiden Barfus was hitting in that game, they got a really solid point guard in him too. What can't that kid do?
Yeah.
So it's, I'm really impressed with Winter as a team. I think they have, solid size, and obviously Blake Vollmer, being that, top wing defender at his size. I think that's a really difficult matchup for pretty much any point guard or, any guard that's sort of playing a lot on the perimeter in the state. So, I'm really impressed with Winter, and I have them at 8 too.
In number 9 on both of our lists, Aberdeen Christian, the only Class B team so far that we have on the top 10 list, and they have been, they had their epic win at the Hanson Classic as well, taking out at that time number 2 White River. But a loss to Del Rapids last week shows maybe they have some vulnerabilities too. But when they're at their best, this is a good one. Again, a 1 through 5 team with some depth on the bench.
Yeah, it's tough with these cross-class matchups, which makes this list so tough to make.
Yeah, it does.
Because
you could make an argument that maybe Del Rapids belongs in this top 5 and they don't.
Exactly.
Or top 10.
It's it's kind of funny how we even make these rankings on a week to week where there's sometimes so much volatility where a couple weeks ago, I mean, I think there were 11 teams that changed spots or maybe even more than that. And then last week, I think there was only one flip of a position. So some outcomes can just completely change people's mind on a week to week basis. So
and teams evolve throughout the year too. I mean, they really do change. Some teams get better, some teams don't.
But yeah, I mean, I have Aberdeen Christian here as well. I think they've, in terms of the teams that they need to beat night in, night out, they've proven that they are significantly, the number one in that class. So it's, you got to give them credit for that. They prepare for that schedule, and, they're doing a good job getting through it.
And at number 10, we both have St. Thomas More rounding out our top 10. St. Thomas More's real signature win is Rapid City Christian. They knocked them off from being undefeated. But in the other tough games they've had this year, they haven't been able to get that other win against Winter and Sioux Valley. But you look at their team and you can see why they scare people. That defensively, they hold teams to 40 points a game.
Yeah, and you got one of the best scorers in the state of Cape Canaveral. Yep. So it's he's going to be a tough guy to stop. Once he gets hot, and just the defense that they play overall. I mean, it's hard to keep them off of this top 10, even though they haven't necessarily gotten that signature win.
Exactly, and I considered White River, I considered Yankton, even teams like Del Rapids that have really played close against a lot of these teams I considered, but I still think if it was a head-to-head matchup, St. Thomas More would be the end of that list. They would be able to beat some of those teams. Let's move on to girls basketball, and interestingly enough, we agreed on the number one team here. And I thought I was pulling a shocker by putting Hamlin as my number one team, but you agree?
Yeah, I mean, it was sort of an arbitrary reason. I thought that you kind of just got to give credit to the undefeated team. I mean, there have been tests for Hamlin to this point. Specifically Vermilion a couple weeks ago, and there's some games where we've kind of been like, will they stay undefeated? And, they've passed every test easily. So, I just think that the way that they're playing, there's really not a more dominant team in their schedule in this state right now, maybe in boys or girls basketball. So it's, then you look at Dakota Valley too. So that's a tough discussion. But we don't have to have that discussion today. That'll be maybe a later date. But yeah, I mean, just in girls basketball, there's not a more dominant team playing against their schedule, and it's hard to argue against that. I mean, we're kind of going off of a little bit of just kind of feel.
Yeah.
But, it's I'm feeling good with Hamlin at number one, but the number two team is really good too, and I think they put up a really good fight against them.
Well, here's the thing. I know all you out there saying, well, Jason, you picked a AA team in the boys' side. Why didn't you pick one on the girls' side? Well, I think it's different. I think AA girls basketball, the field is just, some years they're higher than others. This year, there's not a dominant team in AA for me, and there's a hugely dominant team in A, and that's Hamlin, and they've tested themselves. Flanders, St. Thomas More, West Lyon, Florence Henry, Sisseton, Vermilion, and they really haven't played a close game against any of those teams yet. So that's why I have Hamlin. I just think they've got talent like Addie Neuendorf and Cammie Wadsworth and Marissa Bowden and all these players that know their roles and they just play them so perfectly. I think the Chargers are the best team in girls basketball, at least right now. Yeah, number two, I've got Jefferson, the top team in AA. You have Jefferson, the top team in AA.
Yeah, and I think to your point where there hasn't been a dominant team in AA, this is where we're going to start to see that there not being a dominant team in AA actually helps a lot of these AA teams sort of when you think about the grand scheme of everything in the state. Because, I mean, if you could emerge from a AA schedule with a really good record, this year I think that means more than it has in some previous years. Because we've had in past years where the Washingtons, O'Gormans, they've sort of been the top two going at each other all season long. I think there's a top six this year.
Yeah.
So there's 6 teams in AA that could potentially win the state championship, and that's pretty rare. So, and for Jefferson to be the number one, you got to give him the nod here.
I agree, but just the fact that a team like T-Area beat Jefferson earlier this year shows you that all these teams are vulnerable, and you could make a case from here on out on the list for me to shuffle these teams around just because all these teams are vulnerable. And but I do think Jefferson has had the most consistency, and they belong at number 2. At number 3 on the list, this we had to have a little discussion on Wednesday about this because Washington just lost on Tuesday, but we both feel Washington maybe still the third best team in the state.
Yeah, I mean, it's there's just it's sort of that all-star conversation of like who are you going to replace them with?
Yeah. Who would you replace them with?
So it's Washington with their wins coupled with their losses. I mean, obviously there's been that Harrisburg loss. It was the last second loss. I mean, you like buzzer beaters are almost excusable. Obviously, there's more to a game and there's just one play.
But it shows how close they are.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And we knew that. It's not like, oh wow, like Harrisburg came out of nowhere to beat Washington. Harrisburg's a really, really good team, and we're going to reflect that in these rankings. But it's I mean, I think there's just so many good teams in AA, so you can almost scratch the losses here, and then to get they obviously beat and lost to Jefferson. They beat in Pierre, O'Gorman. It just they've stacked up those top five wins enough for me where I just feel like with how they were playing early in the season and coming in as the number 1 team and getting knocked off that in that loss to Jefferson. I mean, I just think they have enough to stay in that top 3 conversation.
We agree on that, but I seriously almost put Pierre at number 3. I think they're really close. I think they're trending in the right direction. They did lose head-to-head to Washington. That's what prevented me from marking them up, but I've got Pierre at number 4. I believe you do as well.
Yep.
And last night, by the way, or Tuesday night, Remington Price went for her 1,000th career point, exploded in Huron for 24 points. That'll be a really fun team to see going forward to see if they can keep it together. Number 5 on our list, you've got Vermilion, I've got Wagner. We differ just a hair on this one. Your reasoning?
Just a head-to-head matchup. I think we talked about it after the game, and I think a couple weeks after, just sort of looking at that sort of key signature, because that Hamlin-Vermilion game was coming up soon, so we were talking about Vermilion a lot, and obviously Wagner being in the mix. I think if Wagner gets another shot at Vermilion, there's a chance that they beat them. Just with how talented Wagner is up and down their lineup. We talk about these top 5s. I mean, I don't know if there's a better, 1 through 5 in girls basketball, other than maybe Hamlin, especially in Class A. But just that head-to-head matchup and just the energy that Vermilion is playing with at this point of the season, it's hard to pick against them, and they keep on stacking up these wins, and they're young, and you never know how it's going to go for the full season. But to this point, I mean, there hasn't been anybody who's been able to stop them except for Hamlin. So it's right now I'm going to give it Vermilion, but if we ever see that matchup again, I would not be surprised if it could flip.
Exactly. Wagner, by the way, I have a little higher, even though they lost to Vermilion. But they don't have a win against a top 5 team in Class A yet. I think they could, and I think they would fare. This would be one of those teams I think would fare well in AA basketball. They play that style. They've got enough bigs. They've got enough size to defend any team. So I think overall, if you put them in a statewide competition, I think they would fare well, and that's why I have them at number 5. Vermilion, I have at number 6. Vermilion, by the way, they've challenged themselves with some out-of-state competition. Beat Ponca, beat Laverne, and also beat Wagner in South Dakota, and I think they're a really good team. I see them trending just down a hair because of what they did against Hamlin. I see Wagner trending up. That's the only reason I have those two the way I do, and you've got them switched, obviously the head-to-head being a big deal. But right there in that same class, we got O'Gorman, and we both had O'Gorman number 1, or I had them number 1 to go into the season. Maybe I wouldn't say underachieving, but maybe just not reaching their potential quite yet.
Yeah, and I think it goes back to Class AA too. I mean, it's competitive this year, and I don't think that's a knock on any of these teams. I don't think that's something that's should boost these teams all the way to the top.
Right.
Everything's really, really close this year, and obviously we know O'Gorman's top end talent is among the best in the state. So
I'll tell you what, they miss Bergen Riley. They miss a player like that who left early to go play volleyball at Nebraska. I mean, I think one more player like that makes them a much better team.
Yeah, they do, but they have size. They still have more size where they've been getting production at that spot. But we talked about Molly Abdouche. She's one of the better point guards in the state, and I feel like because of this type of season that O'Gorman's having, she's not really being discussed enough. Maybe as much as she should, just given just some of the numbers that she puts up and just the ways that she affects the game. But I have a lot of faith in O'Gorman, when it comes to sort of that state tournament time. They've obviously had a lot of experience there defending AA state champions. So, I'm keeping O'Gorman in, sort of that closer to the top portion of this.
They play Washington Friday. That's going to be a really interesting matchup. We agree on 8, 9, and 10. St. Thomas More we have at 8. Harrisburg we have at 9. Viborg Hurley we have at 10. But let's talk about those three teams. Starting with St. Thomas More, just got a big win against Red Cloud earlier this week. Taking them out of the undefeated ranks. They've beaten Rapid City Christian and Flandreau, but haven't had as many tests as they normally do. And the one big test they had against Hamlin, they just didn't play their best.
Yeah, I think an argument for St. Thomas More being higher on this list is Reese Ross, who we discussed earlier. When
you have Reese Ross, you can play automatically. You can play with any of these teams in the top 10.
Exactly. Yeah, because all you kind of need is for her to, guard the best player on the other team and just kind of go off on the offensive end, and you got a chance.
Yeah.
And that's why I think even though Hamlin's really, really dominating Class A, you can't really rule out St. Thomas More in this sort of state championship conversation. Obviously, they beat Hamlin last year. It's a pretty similar group for Hamlin, even though they got a year more experience than, they've been knocking on the door the past couple of years, and this kind of seems like their year. But Reese Ross is maybe the best player in girls basketball, and she's been playing really, really well. And I'm tempted to put another Class AA team here, but I think just St. Thomas More has more to show once you get those big time matchups coming on their schedule pretty soon. So, I think I'm comfortable with them at 8.
We both have Harrisburg at 9. You had a chance to watch Harrisburg against T-Area earlier this week. What are your impressions of the Tigers?
Yeah, T-Area, first of all, with Katie Vaseka back, she's been back for the past 3 games, and she's sort of on a bit of a minutes restriction. Was told the other night that she was at 75%, but she's working her way back, and she'll be at full strength pretty soon. She changes that team
for T,
a lot.
Yeah, you bet.
They T obviously beat Jefferson earlier in the season, as we discussed. I think they're a team that can knock off another AA team if they have a chance to, and they had a chance to the other night. But Harrisburg, they did what they did all season. They finished strong. They finished strong against Washington, and they've gotten a couple really, really good wins just by staying within the game and making sure that it's close enough at the end where they can make a play. And boy, did they make plays at the end of the game. So it was that was a really impressive win for Harrisburg. And we talked about Sadie Merriman. She just a freshman. She took over at the end of that game where she hit a couple big free throws and was getting into the lane with some spin moves. And they've got a lot of really good individual talent, and they're a bit younger, but I think that they've proven that they're in that top 5 with Class AA, and that's why they get a nod here.
Yeah, totally agree there. And then at 10, we both have a Class B team, Viborg Hurley, and they maybe had their most impressive game this year against Wolsey Wessington at the Hanson Classic. That's where they really stamped themselves into a top 10 in the state. But since then, just recently, Danae Mock probably not playing at 100% when they played Wagner this week and didn't really get on the radar with them. But I think when they're at full strength, they're definitely a top 10 team here. But they have losses this year to Campbell County out of Wyoming, a really good team, and then lost to Wagner just Saturday.
Yeah, and that obviously wasn't a great loss for them, but you mentioned Danae Mock, being not at 100%, and I think that's a really big deal for them.
Yeah.
Obviously, she's one of the better players in Class B, and whenever you don't have a player of that caliber, at their best, then that you're going to struggle, especially against cross-class matchup and a really really good Class A team too. But watch them against Woolsey Wessington, the way that they sort of adapted to that matchup, obviously going against Mallory Miller, who's one of the highest recruited and one of the more talented bigs in the state. I just think Viborg Hurley is really proving that they're at the top of Class B, and we got to give a nod to the top team in Class B, I think.
I totally agree. I really considered Brandon Valley, especially after that win Tuesday, and they also handled the Rapid City schools over the weekend. Florence Henry with just the one loss in the year to Hamlin. That's got to put them in the conversation. Red Cloud with just one loss this year to St. Thomas More. And Woolsey Wessington, again, I think that's the type of team that can play when you have a big like Mallory Miller. You could play with a lot of these other teams. I just don't know if they've got quite enough to crack this top 10, but they're right there too.
Yeah, this list definitely had more teams at the sort of that 11 spot.
Yep.
Where it was maybe they could get in, maybe because there's just been so many, because I mean Red Cloud, obviously we've been talking about them the past couple of weeks. They just got their first loss, I think it was this past week.
Yeah.
So I mean there's been so many good teams in girls basketball this year, and that's what makes girls basketball so interesting this year, where you're seeing a lot of these classes. I mean, I mentioned T area before.
Yeah.
They're not even coming close to the rankings right now,
but
because they have a losing record.
Yeah,
but
they could beat.
I think they could beat pretty much any team that we just listed, as you said. So it's really interesting, because I think we're sort of getting to the point of the season where maybe it's too late for teams to add to their resume, but it's not too late to come out of a region with a couple really big wins. Yeah. So I mean, playoff time will change things, and that's going to be interesting.
And rankings soon will mean absolutely nothing, but this is a little fodder, and I thought it was interesting enough to base this show off of. But we, as always, have our guest coach on, and I chose Tim Reck of Jefferson, my number one team in boys AA, to ask him a little bit about that, and then just how important this undefeated streak is for the Jefferson Cavaliers.
I guess you guys are undefeated, and that takes up a lot of the talk, a lot of the stuff that people like to talk about you guys. How important is that? I'm sure it's not mentioned a ton, but how important is, keeping that record clean for you?
Well, like you said, we don't talk about the record at all. We just talk about getting better every game. And I know that's every coach's cliche statement that they talk to you about, but I'm not going to lie. The kids know what the record is. They understand what's at stake. They understand what they did in football is going to carry over into basketball, they hope. And I know what their goal is, and our goals are similar. It's not necessarily for us to go undefeated this year, but we want to get to the last game of the season. That's for sure.
I mean, you guys are still a fairly new school. How do you characterize this team as far as how well they're playing together, just being the second year of your entire school?
This is a really fun group to be around. They're really close. They care about each other a lot. And it carries over onto the court. I mean, they make sure that, if somebody gets knocked down, they're running over to help them and things like that. And yeah, it's interesting, but these guys have been together, through middle school and things like that. A lot of them have played baseball or other sports together. So they know each other really well, and yeah, they're close, and that's been a lot of fun.
And you guys have been good in tight games too. I mean, not every game's been easy, obviously. And I just feel like it takes something a little different to win those close games. How have you seen your guys mature enough to win those close games this year?
Well, we didn't win those games last year. That was one thing. We got beat in those games. We made decisions, and honestly, I'm gonna credit the football program for being able to win games throughout the year, to teach them on how hard it is to win at the AA level and AAA in football. But yeah, that's been a huge factor for us, and we've benefited from it greatly, from them having to play through all those tough games.
you guys have a unique lineup where you can have confidence in guys off the bench as well. Talk a little bit about how deep this team is and how you don't rely necessarily on one scorer every night.
Yeah, we are very fortunate. We have 9 guys in our rotation that play quite a few minutes. And it actually came into play with us last night. We have one person who is out sick. He's not with us this whole week. We know that. And we just kind of said, you know what? It's next man up. And this is why we have played 9 guys all year, that we can just plug in another guy right in there and we don't miss a beat.
Let's talk about some of your strengths. You guys, obviously have a lot of strengths being an undefeated team, but what do you feel are some of the strengths that make you guys the number 1 team in AA right now?
Our biggest strength, in my opinion, is our overall athleticism. We have a lot of guys who are really, really good athletes, and they just happen to play basketball too, which is very fortunate for us. But they are super athletic with the number of guys that we have going on to the next level to play in college at different sports. You don't see that very often.
That being said, you're always working on something too. I mean, there's always teams that are trying to break you guys down. What do you guys need to get better between now and state tournament time?
We need to continue to get better defensively, and people are gonna, look at me and think I'm crazy with that because we're pretty good defensively. But our communication defensively, we break down at times. Watertown did that to us last night. They were patient offensively, made us play defense for quite a while, and we broke down. So that's something that we're definitely going to be working on going into the last few games of the season here. And we just continue to shoot because that shooting cures a lot of ills. But yeah, we're going to get better defensively. And then our press, we got to make a couple changes too. People are starting to break that a little bit easier than we anticipated them at this point in the season. So we got to make a few tweaks there.
You guys got to be getting excited for this stretch run. Let's just talk about Class AA as a whole. On a nightly basis, every time I look at the scores, I'm always surprised by something that comes up. Just talk to me about the competition level in Class AA this year.
Yeah, I mean, our record indicates that we're having a very successful season, but we know that every night somebody's going to possibly come by and get a win. And you look at Mitchell and Lincoln and even going down to Harrisburg and Washington, and we're looking at things going, okay, we might see them in the Sweet 16. Hopefully we are fortunate enough to win that game, and then it's looking at who gets into the state tournament. You're looking at those matchups over there, and you're like, wow, I don't know if I want to see that team if we are fortunate enough to get to the state tournament. That's not going to be a really fun matchup. Those type of things. So yeah, it's wide open. Brandon's playing really well, and yeah, it's just crazy what's going on this year.
Yeah, so Jefferson, definitely a team to watch. They got Lincoln coming up on February 17th. That should be big. And then going into the playoffs, having that undefeated weight on their back, we'll see if that actually helps them get stronger or it's too much weight for them. But always fun to catch up with Tim Reck. Let's talk about our coverage coming up over the next few days. Michael, what do you got coming up on the Argus Leader?
Yeah, obviously I got a full schedule at the Argus Leader, but
a very full, a very full schedule, everybody.
Yeah, but
he
Friday,
finds time for high school hoops.
Of course, high school. I'm going out to Del Rapids to see them play Dakota Valley. It's always, whenever you get a chance to see Dakota Valley a little bit more local, that's that's a fun team to see live. So going to check out them going against the Warriors, who obviously, Braden Pinconen's been playing really, really well the last couple games. So, I think, Del Rapids is a really, really good team, and I think they're going to give a test to Dakota Valley, but, it's sort of a test for Dakota Valley of, maybe my prediction of them being the top team in the state.
Yeah, we'll see.
It's, I think there's going to be a good game. And
I think Del Rapids puts themselves in this top 10 if they show up, so that'll be interesting. And Pinconen, you mentioned, 30-point game against Aberdeen Christian as they knocked off the number 1 team in Class B, but continue.
Look, I endorse any team at any record, any if they want to list themselves in the top 10, if you could come up with an argument, I endorse any team to do that. So, I'm all for confidence. So that's and I think Del Rapids has a case too. So, they've been playing really well. So that's why I want to see this matchup. I think it's going to be a really good game.
It's going to be awesome. As far as Midco Sports, check out Friday night. It's going to be a huge night. We've got A great game in girls hoops where Pierre travels to Bismarck, the two capital cities taking on each other. I will be there with Jody Norstedt on the call, but we've also got another game on Friday night. So Midco Sports and Midco Sports 2 as well as Midco Sports Plus, you can catch all these games. But we've got JT Rock and the Lincoln Patriots traveling to Brandon Valley to see if Brandon Valley can bounce back after that tough night on Tuesday, but they're still a top 5 team. I think that'll be a lot of fun too. So check out Midco Sports for some live basketball on Friday night. For Michael McCleary of the Argus Leader, I'm Jason Andera, Midco Sports. We'll see you next week.